Welcome to First Funders. I am so excited for today's session. Today is going to be a little different. Today is really special. I have Mel Strong here from Next Ventures, someone who I met and had the chance to collaborate with at Nike. And we're going to do things a little bit differently. Mel offered the option for us to have a conversation where I get to also share what my experiences are or my thoughts are as we brave our way through this new world adventure. The rules of the game continue to change. Capital keeps concentrating in more of the same bets, more of the same firms. But here we are as fund managers building the next generation of venture together. And so, Mel, I'm so excited to have you here because we have a lot in common. Not just having spent time at Nike, but as people who have broke their way into venture and earned our seat at the table without any safety net. And in a way that when the way we show up with founders, it shows up differently. So I met Mel in 2018 when I joined Nike. She was a highly respected leader and at the time the VP of Nike SB, Nike Skateboarding. And she spent a good amount of her career launching products that you may all know, whether it was the Nike iPod in 2006, the Nike Run Club, or the Nike Training Club. And our team had the chance to collaborate on projects that were rooted in sustainability. So today she invests out of Next Ventures, a fund that's dedicated to finding the root causes of poor and disparate health outcomes through whole person care solutions. Her portfolio includes companies we know like Oura Ring, Momentous, which I use. I love their creatine, and Eternal. So today, like I said, it's going to be different. Mel offered the opportunity for the two of us to have an authentic conversation about our journey to venture and what we see about the future. And so together, we're going to answer questions. We've never done it like this before, but I'm excited to spend time to hear both Mel's answers and to be able to share with you, all my listeners, what I think about and where I've come from. So we're going to start with first an intro from Mel, because that's what I always love to do. Mel, welcome to First Funders. I would love for you to sort of share a bit about yourself and tell us why you chose this path, because we all know there are easier paths than being in venture. And if you could also answer the question, sharing a bit about how your upbringing has played a role in how you think about risk and how you think about work.
Absolutely. And I feel like, I don't know if this resonates with you, but I feel like you can only really understand your path when you're like looking back at it. But when you're
Yeah.
in it, it feels like a complete cluster. And I would say for most of my big professional chapters, it has felt that way. A sort of like
Yeah.
going out on a limb. I've never done this before. I don't have the right pedigree. My whole life has been sort of centered on maybe not taking the linear path and not being at least the archetype of the person I imagine the industry
Yeah.
wants in these
Yeah.
roles. So, I was a first grade teacher in Philly, born and raised, which was great, great, hard, very centering role that has definitely taught me a lot. And then I became a journalist, and went back to school, which was great, really good experience. I think a lot of skills actually that I've used as an investor. I've met a lot of great VCs and investors, especially women actually, who have journalism backgrounds. And I think there's something about people and research and being really curious and trying to tell the
Mhm.
truth that I think resonates in VC and makes for a good investor. But I had the opportunity to get an entry level job at Nike, as you mentioned in the intro. And again, like my first interview was for a job that required 8 to 10 years of experience, but I did not have. They wanted an MBA, which I did not have. And I honestly don't think they wanted to hire me, but I like showed up in person for what was meant to be a phone interview. I had a day of panels, which I later learned I completely bombed. But my hiring manager at the end of the day asked if I brought my running stuff. And I looked back and realized this was a bit of a test because a run was not part of the formal interview process. But
Oh,
because I
wow.
was applying for a job in Nike running, and because I was a runner, I was working at Runner's World. Of course, I had running stuff in my rental car. So it was that run with who became my first boss at Nike, that I think
Wow.
kind of got me the job because I was a good runner and we had a great time just connecting personally. And so honestly, I think that step of teaching to journalism to corporate taught me a lot about myself. It taught me
Mm,
not to feel compelled to meet all the requirements expected from me in every professional role I've played. And so
yeah,
the journey to venture, I give you a ton of credit because I knew almost zero about VC when you and I first met. And I'm so lucky that I met you when I did because I was looking for experts. I was looking for people
mm,
to help me understand whether I could be any good at this. I did not want to do corporate again, but I still wanted to contribute meaningfully to our society more broadly. But I
yeah,
wanted to learn what it took to scale a business. I wanted to know that I could perhaps bring some of what I learned as an operator into early stage companies specific to health and wellness, where I feel I have the most expertise. But I didn't really know anything about it. I'd never sat at the table at home or in the office with anyone like you. So it was so cool to have you at that point in my Nike career to help me kind of like demystify a lot of things that I didn't need
yeah,
the MBA and the investment banking
exactly.
background. And so I'm super grateful for you and all the people you introduced me to
Yeah,
for helping me understand that this was like a potential path for me. So thank
for
you.
sure. You're welcome. Yeah. If I look back at all the folks that are in my network who are GPs and partners at funds now, and they've all been on my podcast. They all kind of have a similar story, right? They're not a traditional background. It's like a misnomer in venture that you have to come from banking, to your point. There are certainly folks who do, and they live more so in the bigger funds, deploying larger checks at later stages. But for
Hmm.
the stage that we live at, it's more creative, it's a more builder energy, it's people who've been operators or they've worked in, big tech, or it's a smattering of things, to come to this point and say I'm an early stage investor. And early stage pre-seed through A is really the phase we're talking about. And so when you said you were curious about venture, I was so excited because, like I told you in that moment, we need people like you, right? We need people like you with your experience, with your network, with your perspective, and in the areas you were focusing on. When we talk about whole body health, that movement is just finally now taking off, but we started talking about that 2018. It was starting. It's still starting, but like it is the future. Like we cannot be symptom driven. We must look at root cause. We must look at whole body. And I really said that also, like, because that's what I want to see in the world. And that's how I see venture. It's a way to play a role in what you want to see in the world, right? How do you want the arc of our future to look like? And that's why I, spend my time in this space. It's why I chose to be in tech from the get-go, which maybe gives me the opportunity to respond to the same question of like how did I get here?
Yeah. So, like, I know a little bit, obviously, about your background, but I'd love to revisit it and just hear more about your arc because you did a bunch of things before you came to Nike. You spent a lot less time at Nike than I did, which was probably wise. And now you're back in venture. So, like, tell me a little more about how that's felt for you, kind of starting from sort of your first chapter.
Yeah, for sure. And like maybe even going back a little further for you, look, the sort of like water that I swam in growing up has a huge influence on why I chose capitalism and why I chose VC. So my father was a small business entrepreneur. My mother was a competitive athlete. And so this idea of being an owner, building, embracing risk, like starting a company or being a part of starting a company, like that just comes to me way more naturally than being in a big corporation. And I've always known that about myself. So
Hmm.
when I was young and thinking about what I wanted to do, I always had that sort of like pull towards building and creating something that doesn't exist yet, and slowly realized, again in hindsight, that, it would look like something called a startup. But in the moment, of course, you don't know that. And
Hmm.
I think for my mom, who, was a competitive sprinter, by the way,
Oh, cool.
in Karachi, Pakistan, by the way, in the 60s, right? Like
How did
wearing
that
shorts,
happen?
she's cut from a different cloth, right? So like the idea of like not giving up, dedicating to a practice, being in competition, those things were just like it's like the water I swam in, right? In terms of like what was around me. And the other part was from my spiritual practice. The message I got from our spiritual leader was like, life is short, have the biggest, most positive impact you can have with your life. And like that was ingrained from day zero for me, like those three sort of like arcs. And so as I was exploring, what do I do? Where do I go? I tried like journalism, dentistry, medical, nonprofit, x-ray technician, like all these things in high school. And because I wanted to come out the gate into college knowing what I wanted, and nothing just fit right until I did an internship at a tech consultancy when I was
Hmm.
in, I think, first year of college. And we were advising companies on how to go online.
Oh my gosh.
Like 2000, right? This is 99, 2000. How to make a website for your small business. What is
Amazing. Well,
SEO?
I started at Nike. My first job was digital producer. So in
Oh, there
2002,
you
I
go.
was producer of NikeRunning.com and NikeACG.com, neither of which were e-commerce enabled. So you came to a website and then you saw some stuff. And then maybe you would go to your local retailer to buy the stuff you saw. Like
Isn't it? Isn't it insane? It's
it's so
insane.
funny because you think about AI. I know we're going to talk a little bit about how we view AI through the lens of
Yeah.
investing now. And I keep thinking about what it was like to live in that era of the early 2000s.
Yep.
So I think it's
Yep.
amazing.
Right? Like the pre.com era, right? Now AI is the substrate and, it's just natural. But yeah, that's exactly what we're going through right now. So yeah, look, for me, that was like a defining moment where I realized, oh, tech. Like in sort of 2000, I realized tech was going to be the biggest industry of our time.
Hmm.
And so what sort of like fits the sort of like influence I had around, taking risk, being a builder, being competitive, and having a net positive impact on the world, like capitalism came up for me. And then this idea of helping companies and being a sort of like startup-y thing, like the word startup just showed up into my world. And so as I graduated, and I continued to do internships in sort of like tech consultancy because that's all you could find in Canada. I had a friend who had started a company in high school and sold it to some company in LA. And before I knew it, his company went public on the LA Stock Exchange and he was like in Silicon Valley. And I was like, what is this? And it was like a web hosting company, right? So anyway, the thread I followed and I realized Silicon Valley is where I belong. So when I graduated from college, I booked a one-way flight, took a sort of line of credit and went to go look for my first job. I interviewed at Google. That didn't go over anywhere at all. Again, big company, not for me. But then I found my first gig at a nonprofit that was supporting entrepreneurs, similar to what I had done in high school. And these were tech entrepreneurs now. And so I did that for a bit as a way to like get in the ecosystem. And then I found a startup that I was really excited about. And that's when I knew I'm like, I'm here to like be a part of something that's pretty early. And so I joined my first startup in a marketing role and then eventually became the first product manager. And it was a series of three different startups that I worked at in product and in marketing. And now you're going to laugh because the first startup was a VoIP startup, right? So a competitor to Skype. Yeah, I know. Some people I mentioned it to, they're like,
For
so,
sure.
I cut my teeth. It was a Sequoia-backed company, um, at Jaja, and from there followed the founders to another startup, and then from there so I worked in three venture-backed startups. So I soaked myself into being an operator at a startup in this product and marketing role, and I loved it. Right, I loved sitting at the intersection of design and product and shipping new products every week, every month, whatever the cadence was at the time. But in parallel, I had an itch to start a company. And so I would go to these networking events and I'm like, why am I the only girl in the room? Why is this all dudes? What's going on? And so I just started to create my own events. I'd met these three women who said, look, we all said together, tech is going to be the most important industry of our time. As I'd said to myself when I left Canada to come to the US, we said the same thing in our room. In this room, by the way, it was like the first Facebook office. So we
No
booked a
way.
room in because it was
That's
open and we knew
auspicious.
someone who worked there. So random. Yeah.
That's
And I
great.
couldn't even get on to Facebook then because it was for, like, people who graduated from a US college,
Yeah,
and
totally.
I graduated from a Canadian university, so I was like, "What's Facebook?" I got in, they let me in, I, like, asked someone to, like, add me, so I was, like, one of the first Canadian users.
That's
Anyway, look, that was the start of me sort of side hustling. So my journey has been I've always done things that I love in the day and at night. And so my side hustle was building an ecosystem for women because we said if we're building these, web 2.0 products, right? Again, this is like 2005.
mhm,
The people who use these products are not a homogenous group, right? They're diverse people, they're humans, they're men, they're women. So we need women in influential roles, whether they're founders or executives of these new tech startups, to be included. Otherwise, these products are just going to exclude us.
mhm.
And there were, as we know, numerous examples of this type of poor product design in our time. And so that sort of became our thing is like, how do we get more women to be founders of technology startups at day zero, such that the companies that get built actually solve the problems that need to get solved for the people that are having the problems?
Hmm.
And that was the start of something called Women 2.0. And I did that on the side to inspire more women to be founders while working at these other startups in the day, hoping that I would meet a co-founder that I could start something with. So like it was like there was like, in a bigger picture, but also like I hope I find someone that I can work with. Um, that never happened. What instead happened was I realized that I am truly an ecosystem builder
Mm. That's what
and
Women
that
2.0 was. I was part
yeah,
of that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So what started to happen is I started to become sort of like a node for people who were starting companies and then investors who wanted first access.
Mm,
And so I would, make relationships between these two folks in the moment that they were raising their pre-seed or their seed round, give feedback on their pitch decks. Like I just started to see a lot of data points of companies and new ideas and new moments, new ways to do things. I just started to become a wave of inbound. And so what I did is I ended up turning that into an incubator. I happened to meet Eric Ries, who's the creator of Lean Startup. His book was just coming out. It hadn't come out yet.
mm.
And I was like, oh, that framework makes sense. What can we do to bring it to the people that are coming to my events? Because at this point, our network had become tens of thousands of women. We were in our fifth year doing it on the side, and I remember the moment where he said, "Yeah, let's turn this into a program." And I was like, "Yeah, let's turn this into a." So we designed a 5-week program to go from 0 to 1, which is what I ended up bringing to Nike. So I'm
Yeah.
giving you this really long story, but essentially, to your point, it all looks uncoordinated until the moments when you look in the rearview mirror. So as I ran this incubator, Founder Labs, one of the companies we incubated on day zero, you probably use it, is a two-factor authentication company called Authy,
Oh, of course.
which got acquired by Twilio. So we sourced the founder. He was coming out from Colombia, had this crazy idea of using your mobile phone for the two-factor authentication and not the little hardware piece that most corporations had to use.
Oh my god.
Um, and we got him going, got him into YC, et cetera, et cetera. And so as that started to happen for me, like those outcomes made me realize I was good at finding founders and supporting them in that earliest journey. And so I just kept doing more of it. And that's where the incubator came into play. That's following that, I continued to do it on my own. So another company I helped incubate was called Republic, which is now a unicorn.
Oh,
So if you
yeah?
know Republic, it started off as an equity crowdfunding platform. I was
Yeah.
with the founder day zero before it even had a name. It used to be called Open Deal, and we got really clear on what's the problem, what's the solution, who's the customer, how do we launch this, how do we pitch this to investors. I was always sort of this co-pilot to these founders.
Mhm.
And I loved it because I got the chance to start a bunch of things and have them continue on, and many of them failed, but these are the ones that survived. um, anyway, this I've never told my story this way, so here
It
we are.
it's great. This is exactly
Yeah,
why I wanted to do this because, I mean, when you get to meet someone in a work setting, like, you get like, just little bits of the story, right? I never
yeah.
actually had the opportunity to hear the whole story. Um, it's amazing.
And
It's like you've had 9
yeah,
lives.
yeah, around the time Republic had just launched was around the time I connected with Hannah. So this is where the story, I was very not expecting any of this to happen, but here I was bopping around, spending my time with founders, 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year at a time, getting them from 0 to 1 because I just realized, like, that was my jam.
Mhm.
And I met with Hannah and she said, "You've got this, like, 0 to 1 playbook." She's like, "We're
Give
trying to do
context on
this."
who Hannah is
Oh, yes.
for
And
your audience.
so I through a common connection, Peter Sims, he said, Nike's trying to create an incubator and you just did that."
Hmm.
And I was like, "I did just do that. So what?" was sort of my
Yeah.
response. He's like, "Will you meet with them?" And so, I had the chance to meet the then VP of a to be created business unit that did not also have a name. But the idea was, how do we come up with net new revenue streams for Nike in spaces including social commerce, health and wellness, and sustainability? But we need to generate these new ideas from 0 to 1. And so when I met with Hannah and I shared the work I've been doing, she's like, "This is exactly what we need. We need to, like, try a bunch of new ideas inside a corporation and build them and scale them only if they're good enough." And I was like, "Great, exactly the point, right? You need to do this venture style." And so I came in and without really realizing it, honestly, brought my playbook, but basically designed it as if we were venture investors. And we, together with Hannah, set the goal that these new ideas have to be so big that there's a line of sight to 100 million in revenue or in 5 to 7 years, or it's not worth it. It's not
Mhm.
worth it as a VC. It's not worth it as a company the size of Nike. And so that meant creating a really rigorous innovation process. What's the idea? Who's the customer? What is the market size? And can we actually get traction? And we would hire former founders to do this, but it also meant, because we were so rigorous with our criteria, like we are as VCs, right? You need to hit a certain bar at the pre-seed, at the seed, at the Series A. And those were the stages, by the way, that we sort of mirrored inside the company. It meant we killed a lot of ideas inside a corporation that wasn't a normal practice,
Yeah.
right? We did a lot of things differently that didn't feel right because of the level of failure required to get to something big.
Which is crazy, right? Because innovation was one of Nike's like mission objectives, right? To be innovative, to push the boundaries of what's possible in sports. But you're right. I think when you and I partnered, and I think for me as a longtime Nike employee, the reason why Valiant Labs was so exciting to me is it seemed like you still had a remit to innovate and fail. And I'll be
Yes,
honest, in the back half of my career at Nike, there was zero appetite for failure. We were very afraid of failing. And so that's, I think, why so many people were attracted to Valiant Labs internally, is it felt like the last bastion of that opportunity to iterate on things, break things, learn a few
yeah,
lessons on behalf of the brand and bring the things that
yeah.
work back in. And so it's a big testament to you and Hannah and the original team at Valiant for being a place where we thought that was possible. And we had some success there.
We did. We did. I think you heard that Nike refurbished in the last fiscal year hit 100 million in revenue, which was the exact goal we had.
It's awesome.
And it
That's
took that amount of time, right? We incubated it in 2018. And it
yeah.
was like, that's exactly the time it takes. And so I think there's something about the journey of taking risks and failing that was a big part of my experience at Nike. And I think when I was there, two things happened to me. One was like, oh, I really know how to go from 0 to 1 because I just recreated it inside one of the biggest corporations there ever was. And I know a lot about how it works at each stage, and I know what good looks like. And in parallel, I started to angel invest.
Mm.
I, up until that point, was always the co-pilot, the first advisor, the incubator person, the person who was like kind of building in the trenches with these founders. And this was the first time where I instead started to write personal checks.
Oh, wow.
And it's when I wrote the first check that I was like, this feels different. And I like it. And I like it.
It's so important. And I think it's important. I mean, that was similar to my journey. I did not have the diverse founder, tech operator. kind of 0 to 1 type of experience that you had, obviously, but I started angel investing as well. And honestly, my
Right.
first few investments were in companies that I discovered while I was at Nike because they were
Yeah.
doing interesting work that was
Mhm.
adjacent to what we were trying to do or possibly competitive, although, it would be death like a thousand paper cuts for Nike to um, see startups as meaningfully competitive. But back then, I thought this would just be a really interesting way for me to learn through my own investments. So I think that's often the path for a lot of VCs who maybe don't come from investment banking. You put
Yeah.
your own capital, hard earned in our experience, like into a company and do the same kind of diligence and have the same skin in the game. I think that
Yeah.
prepares you so well to deploy capital through a fund.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's reflect on that jump for both of us. Um, in that moment where you and I were talking and you were exploring venture and you made the move, right? What Tell me a bit about what you kept from the Nike or other experiences you've continued to keep in your job, and what did you really have to like let go of and like unlearn along the way?
Yeah. It's been pretty balanced. And when I first left in 2019, I thought I would have to unlearn a lot. You know,
Mhm.
I'd been there for so long, almost 20 years. I'm not naive enough to acknowledge that the things that make a big $50 billion brand work from both a leadership perspective and a go to market
Mhm.
strategy perspective and membership, where I spent a number of my later years working within Nike, are not necessarily plug and play for a smaller startup. And so the reality is, and Aura is kind of a nice example of this. I think it took me a few years to understand that there is actually more application at a certain scale, maybe at the Series A stage of my
Mhm.
experience directly into a company building in this space. And so
Absolutely.
having that opportunity to kind of get in with a company and be like, oh, I can actually help at a certain point after we've proven product market fit and we're just starting to figure out who our real target audience is. Should it be tech bros? Should we think about serving women primarily through a wearable device? Here are the pros and cons. That was 2021. It was such a cool moment a few years into building Next Ventures for me to
Mm.
feel like my operating experience and specifically building digital products at Nike was really, really useful for one of our portfolio
Yeah.
companies. But
Yeah.
man, so much unlearning, because we are both the products of immigrant parents. I do think I learned a lot about what it takes to trust yourself
Mm.
and use your community to help you be successful. Like I knew a solo GP path wasn't for me. Like I'd always been on teams. I also know that there are a lot of things I don't know, and I just felt we would be better if there was a we involved instead of a me.
Yeah.
But having lived, I'm half Japanese, and having seen my grandmother and my mother's experience as first gens, my mom moved here when she was a baby, when at the time it wasn't popular to be Japanese in this country, and to
Mm.
see and experience discrimination through the lens of my mom's experience and a little bit of my own, actually. Um,
Mm.
we lived in the South for a little while in the late 70s, early 80s, when I
Mm.
was just foreigner looking enough
Yeah.
to get bullied. And prior to
Sure.
that, honestly, I'd never had that experience. We lived in Japan and I felt pretty welcome there. And then when we lived on the East Coast where I was born, I felt really welcome there. But there was a period
Mm.
in like third to fifth grade where I was an outsider. And I
Mm.
actually, as much as that sucked, obviously, as it would for any child, like I look back at that and I'm like, okay, I can be an outsider and I can still deserve to be here and prove that I'm good, if not great.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the things that I learned from my own experience and certainly my parents helped me through the hard times of transitioning out of a career I'd spent so much of my life building to do something where I wasn't invited. No one was like, "Oh, Mel Strong should be a VC. This is a great idea." I mean, I had
Right.
friends, and peers, and mentors like you around the table, but let's be clear, like, I was elbowing my way in there and just figuring out where we could carve out a space that would be
Yeah.
meaningful for next ventures. So there's that. The grit is an overused word for experiencing
Mhm.
hours, but I think there is something to having to kick down closed doors, having to feel comfortable in your own skin, and just
Yeah.
knowing you don't need to change who you are to be great. Those are lessons I think you distinctly learn through the experiences we've had growing up.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Just like reflecting on what you're saying too, one thing I would say is you sharing how being at Nike was super helpful to you with Aura as an example, and I'm sure many other portfolio companies since. I would say the same for me. Up until that point, I had never worked in a big corporation. And I wouldn't have understood what it takes to sell into an enterprise until I lived it, until I was the receiver of all the things that people want to sell you. And so my empathy for sort of the enterprise sales journey is so much higher and so much more real, right? Because I can speak to what it takes to just become a vendor. And there's so many dinosaur moments in a company like Nike, and yet I would say I also felt at home because when I met you and I met other senior leaders, you all actually operated, I don't know if you know this, but very entrepreneurially.
Really?
Not yeah, in a way like you had conviction about a way and you would move down whatever was in your way to make it happen. And I saw that and I could feel it. Like there was still
Hmm.
some entrepreneurial spirit. Like Heidi O'Neill was like that, Hannah was like that. Okay, maybe it was all the women. Right? But, like,
Hmm.
there was, like, some level of, like, bravery that I saw in you all, but it was not even bravery, it was just conviction that you knew this was the path. And so
Yeah,
I wanna, like, echo that back to you, but also say, like, it sharpened me to remind myself that always operate from conviction,
yeah.
right? That, like, on your point of, like, not changing who you are, that also happened to me at Nike. I had an identity breakdown. This was the first time I wasn't the founder or the co-pilot of something that like was in my full control, and by the way also was my full identity. I was just coming off having run Woman 2.0 and Founder Labs. I was a founder, I was those brands, and
Mm.
now I had a badge and I was like,
You remember your
whoa, this
employee number at Nike?
yeah, yeah, it's
What was it?
I want to say it's like 808066 or something like that. I know it was like 006 was the ending of it,
I
but like
was
you're probably
63860.
okay, there you go.
I was employee number 63,860.
Yeah, like exactly my point, right? Like it's it's such a different environment and yet you find also, the parts that are common to what you know and what you believe in, which was like the entrepreneurial energy for me. And then I learned so much about what it sells into enterprise, but also what it takes to operate something at scale and the level of precision that's required. Like as we were continuing to scale Nike Refurbish or trying to take some of our products to market to scale through the Nike Run Club, or if it was through the what was the workout app called? Nike Plus? Nike
Yeah,
Plus?
the
No,
Nike Training Club.
the Nike Training Club. It's just a different game that I had played where I would be the owner of the product. I would ship the products,
Mm,
right? But like to see things operate with that level of rigor and scale, it really rounded out who I was. And I think it's allowed me to also show up differently to my founders.
I
I
believe
think
it.
also to your point on the like putting your own capital to work, right? Like it shifted my energy from being sort of, you know, co-pilot builder in the trenches to a guide and a oh, maybe guide's not the right word, but a steward
Mm,
of the capital that was put into that company, right? So as even if it was my own capital and now it's the capital of my LPs, I just noticed that that's a different posture altogether, and it's a posture that allows me to sort of like look at the deal very holistically and not through the eyes of the founder, right?
interesting.
And be able to say the hard things because when you're the first advisor and the first builder, you just want the founder to win only, right? But here, as an investor, like even as an angel investor, I've had to like say things to these founders that I wouldn't have normally said. And I don't say it because I believe they're wrong. It's just a perspective for them to consider that I think is more holistic and more big picture than just, being, almost, intoxicated by the founder's journey, which is what I, used to. So I've had to really, for my unlearning, it's been that. And it's just like, I like operating from there now.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
believe it. I believe it. I'm so jealous that you got to like build, co-found, and be a founder before you did corporate.
Yeah.
I wonder how
Mhm.
different my perspective would be now. I had a career before Nike, but I had never built anything. And I don't know
Yeah.
if this resonates with you, but I found that a lot of people are investors because they want to build, but they don't know what they want to build themselves. And so instead, they
Mm.
exist to serve the people building.
Yeah.
They build
Right.
funds or they
Yeah.
deploy their own
Yeah.
capital into
Yeah.
founders building things that inspire them. And
Yeah.
I think what you said is absolutely true too. It really resonates with me. Some of the biggest mistakes I've made with my own capital and maybe early days with our LP's capital is understanding how to balance your enthusiasm for the founder with the realities of whether that business is venture scale or not. And will this investment return the fund? And certainly once you get to a place, like we have almost 30 companies now in our portfolio between our first and second funds.
Mhm.
And, so we've gotten enough opportunities to understand where we're good and where we're not, so we've been doing a lot of hindsighting as a team. And it's often the case for me. My personal blind spot is falling in love with the person, the
Yeah.
founder, at
100%.
the
Yeah.
expense of really being able to critically diligence the business. Obviously, that's now something as a team we've protected the investment committee process around. But early days, I think I just fell in love with the passion and vision. And Nike probably taught me a bit of this. Spending so many years with athletes,
Mhm.
who have had to bet on themselves, especially female
Yeah.
athletes. Like I'm so stoked on this moment in women's soccer and women's
Mhm.
basketball, just because I feel like you and I were working in sports at a time when women's sports wasn't necessarily a driving commercial opportunity, a driving
No.
audience participation opportunity. All of that has changed. We just hosted the International Women's Sports Film Festival here in Portland last week. It was so cool because it was sold out and there were these packed audiences of all different kinds of people, right? Not just
Yeah.
women,
Yep.
wanting to watch these stories of women athletes. It feels like in the last few years, it just has like finally sort of become a place where people see opportunity, not through the lens of charity. Like this isn't just
Yeah.
a cute, like, let's check the box on women's sports. Like, no, this is a massive market. And so I wanted to ask you about, because I think the fact that your mom was an athlete is very interesting.
Yeah.
We have this perspective and culture within our firm around the athlete's mindset because we're all
Yeah.
athletes, but we are also really interested in finding founders who have an athlete mindset. Like, this is why I think athletes make great investors, great business leaders.
Yeah.
And you know this, like an athlete doesn't need to be a professional
Yeah.
Olympian level athlete, but
For
anyone
sure.
who's ever set a goal, put everything on
Yeah.
the line for that goal, failed
Exactly.
publicly in seeking
Oh,
that
yeah.
goal. All those cross country races that I lost in high school and college,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I think that those reps really matter and that my
Yeah.
mind was comfortable with the idea that I could fail. Although I was very afraid of failing when I left Nike. And this is such a blind spot for so many of us, I think. What are people going to think? You know,
Yeah.
if I
Yeah.
leave Nike, and I want
Yeah.
to hear more about like why you left Nike and what you decided to
Yeah.
do next and why and what
Yeah.
you've learned during your time working with me and the rest of the crew in Beaverton. But I was really afraid of failing because I was doing something that was pretty unusual. A lot of my peers at Nike were leaving to go work at other big companies, right? Whether it was
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
sports or outside of sports. There weren't many, if any, Nike folks creating venture funds. And
No.
like,
Nobody.
who am I to think that I'm the right person to do that? And what if I
Mhm.
was unsuccessful, like, what would people think? I constantly
Yeah.
had to check myself those first few years. I know you have gone on to continue to take risks since you left Nike,
Yeah.
but I'd love to just hear more about what that thought process was like for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what happened for me was, I was reaching 5 years, and the journey of building the business unit with Hannah from 0 to now, what it was when I left, which was like a sort of like well-oiled machine to some degree, that was when I was like, this is not where I belong anymore. I'm the starter, right? I'm the like catalyst. I'm the designer,
Mm,
whether it's org design or people design or, innovation process design or investment process design. Everything that created Valiant's journey was in place, right? And I think that for me, that's sort of where I feel, okay, I'm done. I've done enough. And I think in parallel, as I continued to do angel investments, my interest in becoming a venture capitalist full time started to become bigger and bigger. And I also had to break through the thought of, will I make it? Because to be a VC is, first of all, breaking in, the odds are low, and then actually making the right bets and having outsized outcomes, the outcomes are also low. None of the choice made any logical sense,
yeah,
right? But every time I would quiet my mind, whether I would meditate, or go on a run or whatever, like for me, my sport is yoga.
mm,
I've gone deep into the practice. I am a yogi. I am someone who I've done like teacher training. I've taught classes like that. That is my sport. But it's also the place where I find myself and I find the messages that are coming to me. And, you know, it just kept coming through of like, my dad passed away in 2011 and his voice was just always like, give it a go. Like
yeah,
what's the worst that could happen? But more importantly, as some of the companies I had backed came to fruition, right? Like Republic is now a unicorn. Um, there's a couple other companies I backed that I just started to see momentum. There's nothing else I can think of that makes the best possible use of who I am, authentically who I am, and what I can bring to the table. Like there literally no other gig, right? Everywhere else I would feel underutilized and I would feel that there was more for me to do. But venture allows me to really step in and, resonate with the builder's hat. I see the big picture on what could be venture scale or not. And I want to talk about that if we have time, because I think that's a big part of the role as a VC is to suss out what actually can reach venture scale.
mm,
And it's a very small subset of every innovation that you see. And also this idea of like, I have built a really credible reputation and network with people who want to back and support the things that I support. And so, like, the combination of what I've done in my life, who I am, and who I know was just so strong to pointed towards early stage founders that I was like, this is the only option, my friends. Nothing else makes sense. Um,
could you
and yeah,
imagine
and
having
the
come
reason
to
I
this career, like, earlier in your life? Like, I would have been
no,
so
actually, I
unprepared.
didn't. Yeah, I hadn't. So because I was always the supporter of the founders, and that every VC back then, the wave of VCs that I was around were a little more, structured
Yeah,
and not sort of from the builder background. The founder operator VC profile just came into play in the last 5 years, 10 years
it's
maybe.
true.
When I saw people I knew who were former founders, like Amit at Excel, right? He built a company before he became a VC, and plenty of others. I thought, oh, no, 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 this profile needs to be, it only makes sense to me. I would, if I was a founder, I would want me,
Yeah,
you know? Yeah. So, anyway, were you going to answer the question too?
I can. Um, I mean, I'm so glad that I came to this chapter of my career exactly when I did,
Yeah.
because I don't think I would have had the confidence, and I
Yeah.
don't think I would have had the endurance. VC is a weird game. When you come
It
from an operator life, specifically working at a big corporation, like you're used to constant change, all of
Mhm.
those things, but you know how you're doing immediately. Like, you get performance evaluations for one pretty regularly.
Yeah,
But then two, like the public market it tells you at Nike, like, how you're
yeah,
performing by which geography, which categories are doing well or poorly. There's lots of levers to pull and lots of data that gives you sort of real-time feedback on how you are doing in the role you're playing at that corporation. When you're a fund manager and you're deploying into early stage, let's talk about what it means to be a venture scale business, because I do think that exercise of
mm,
vetting a company, but then keeping that company focused on,
yeah,
like, either playing out that path, the reason why you
yeah,
invested in them, or if they're shifting gears, why that new path is still going to create the kind of returns we're in the business of creating. And I think
yeah,
I think that nuance for me early on was really challenging. Because
yeah,
again, like you said, you want these founders to succeed, but our responsibility, first and foremost, yours and mine, are to our LPs.
yeah,
The people who have decided that we are good enough to to pick great companies and to
yeah,
pick a few companies that are going to win. So that responsibility has weighed on me from the very beginning, and I do think I'm not sure I would have been prepared for that earlier. I think I needed the experience and the maturity and also like a full life of
yeah.
things that
Agreed,
brought me to a point where I feel like I trust myself, or I know how to find the answer. So I'm grateful I didn't try to do this sooner. Frankly, I would have had no
agreed.
business doing it
I
earlier.
agree with you.
But
Yeah,
it's been
yeah,
yeah, it's been amazing.
yeah. I feel the same way. I feel like everything I've done and everything I've learned and experienced shows up every single day.
Mhm.
And had I had any gaps in the operating side of it or the incubation side of it, I wouldn't have felt so convicted that I belonged in this seat,
Yeah.
right? So maybe let's wrap on like what we're both sort of doubling down on in this context. What we're both doubling down on as we look, let's say, to the next 5 years, because I can't think we can look past 5 years. Everything's
I
changing
know.
so fast.
I know.
And I'd love to share sort of like how we think about, the stage that we invest at. So, given that, like what we look for and what we're excited about. So, at Unshackled Ventures, we are hilariously early, right? We're backing founders where they just have an idea, which is the stage I mentioned that I spent my whole career in, right? So we tend to zero in on the types of founders who, first and foremost, are immigrants because we believe immigrants have outsized resilience and grit
Mm,
and they outperform the market time and time again. Data shows we don't have to go into that. And because and ultimately, like, as immigrants, like, we uniquely understand the journey and can support them in ways that others can't, whether that's immigration or networks, so what we look for. So when we're thinking about the next 5 years, what we've been noticing is there are 2 types of founders that we get really excited about. The first is what we call a technical visionary. These are people who are coming out of our institutions. They've got, a master's or a PhD or they're a postdoc in some kind of net new technology for the world. And these are like we're talking about the top 1% of people who sit at the intersection of really interesting technology, but they also think in that venture scale that we were talking about,
mm,
right? So this could be companies in energy, climate, robotics, quantum, biotech. They are people who are set out on a bigger mission than just the research that they've done. So an example of one of our companies is Cash Energy. Cash Energy has started by a founder who in his research in his master's and his PhD was looking at how do I create a sustainable source of energy that is also portable and works in any environment without any setup cost.
hmm,
Sounds easy, right? And so he discovered that you can store energy in limestone pellets and make them very sustainable and portable. And he's at a point where he's raising a Series A. He now has Duke Energy as a customer, Whirlpool as a customer, Alaska PG&E, and they are using it to get off the grid. So one of many examples of companies that are just truly, creating something net new for the world that is absolutely going to be at scale. So when we think at the venture scale of this, energy as a market, the shift towards, getting off the grid, it the opportunity from a market standpoint is really incredible, but the solutions that live in these spaces are clunky, they're confusing, they're expensive. And the per unit cost that he's come down to is one that a customer cannot say no to.
Hmm.
So like that combination of things is, a very unique set, that I think like, just a researcher could not have thought of, right? So it's a very unique human that we back. The second type of persona we tend to back are system disruptors. So these are people who've worked in industry and they've seen the guts of the industry, so it's such that they're ready to disrupt it in some way.
Ooh.
So an example of one of our companies is sort of an AI orchestration layer for supply chain. And this founder started 10 months ago. He'd worked in supply chain his whole life and saw that people are just throwing robots into warehouses, but there's still humans around and the workflows are not flowing as efficiently as they could. The work cannot be efficient without the workflows being orchestrated with the humans as well. And he is killing it. This guy just raised a preemptive Series A within 10 months of our first check. And so these are, again, people who he's so deeply embedded into his industry that that's his competitive advantage. So these people go into complex industries, regulated industries, and we find that their ability to really find the unique opportunity and then do it at venture scale, it's natural to them because they've operated there. And so, when we look at the next 5 years, we're definitely looking at the future of, for sure, healthcare and health delivery, physical AI, science on like biotech in a new way, quantum. We're generalists at the end of the day, but if these people fit in these two buckets,
Hmm.
like follow their journey in a way that we can unlock them in a way that no other funds can.
Yeah, very cool. I've often thought about the question of like whether it's better to be category specific or generalist. You're kind of both. Like you get the best of both worlds because you are focusing on
Yeah.
impact founders, right? So you're
Yes. Yes.
sort of like creating that first filter through the lens of founder experience, lived experience, which I think is
Yeah.
really smart. And then within that, I think the generalist strategy makes a ton of sense. We are going at it through the lens of category specificity. So our firm, and you
Yeah.
articulated it so beautifully at the beginning of this. I won't go into what whole person health is in too much detail, but like pre-COVID, the whole idea of consumerization of healthcare was pretty new.
Right. Yeah.
I think we all got this like hard lesson in 2020 to today that you have to be the captain of your own experience as a
Yes.
patient and person, and that the healthcare system, especially in this country, is
Yeah.
pretty backwards. So
Yep.
85% of healthcare spend in this country are spent on things that are preventable. And so our
Yeah.
job as investors is to find those big levers of preventative healthcare upstream that can drive better outcomes. And then we also have a downstream practice. So
Mm.
it's so cool to be here with you now and say like we're hiring people and we just closed fund two, and it's like I finally feel like I'm getting to that point we talked about earlier where I can be like, okay, I think we might be good at this.
Yeah.
We've got great returns, we have DPI, and we are in a position, like a very lucky position to be hiring people. And so we brought on Felix Kim a couple months ago, who is building out our downstream healthcare strategy. So the
Mm.
idea is eventually we will be finding companies that are closing the gap between upstream healthcare utilization from the perspective of patient or consumer and downstream utilization. So integrating with payers, healthcare and hospital groups,
Mm.
pharma. So we've got like a really interesting spot, I think, where we may be differentiated from more traditional health tech firms.
Wow.
And the things that I'm excited about, I think are pretty similar to yours. Like I think that AI is going to help enable better healthcare outcomes. In the
Absolutely.
ways in which we lived through the era of personal computing, and technology was and will always be used for both good and bad things. But because we're
Totally.
investors, you have to be more optimistic than pessimistic. And so I do believe tech and AI and this generation of like large language models will be used to do more good than not good. So I continue
Agreed.
to be very bullish about that. And I think AI is also going to give people an opportunity to think more about how they spend their time.
Yeah.
I think there are a host of really interesting challenges we're going to face as a society. But
Hmm.
in all the ways, I think both of us decided to be fund managers because we wanted to be part of building that future at this stage in
Yes.
our lives, having seen our own companies, the companies we founded, the companies we worked for, nonprofits and for profits, tackle this problem of how to grow while building for a better future. Like, who
Yeah.
wouldn't want to sit in our seats at this moment in time? It's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. When I think about my why every day, and I remember articulating it to myself over and over every time it was time to think about leaving Nike and jump into venture with no plan, which is like, I'm here to bend the arc of our future in a positive direction by being the wind behind the backs of founders that are building our future.
Mm,
Like that just like wakes me up every day because founders, the intersection of technology, innovation, capitalism, just that intersection is just so powerful.
mhm.
And to be able to be sort of the wind behind that energy or be the energy really, my gosh, what else would I want to do with my life? It just feels so meaningful to me.
Yeah, I
So
totally agree. I think we're both motivated by the same things for sure.
definitely, absolutely. Look, this was fun. Thank you so much, Mel, for spending time with me, for letting me banter on about some of the things I'm thinking about and the journey to venture. It was really fun to switch it up, not be a host.
Well,
We are.
thank you so much for having me. This was super fun.
Yes, thank you. All right, welcome back. That was another great episode. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So typically, I listen to the episode as soon as we record it, take some time to reflect, do some thinking, do some writing, and share back my takeaways. Many of you have said how much you enjoy the takeaways, which I appreciate because this is why I'm doing this. I'm doing this to take the time to think and reflect and have my own thoughts about what other people are saying. So it's the real reason for doing all this is to have some takeaways. However, I'm going to change the format of how I share my takeaways. And there's two reasons for that. One is I want to hear from you. I love recording my thoughts, but it's also great to hear what you all think, the listeners. So, whether you're an angel investor, a venture capitalist, or a founder, I want to hear your thoughts too. If you agree or disagree, or have new thoughts, or have questions, I'd love to hear what those questions might be. So that's one reason is I want to be in conversation. I want to be in community with all of you listeners. The second reason is things are changing in a good way for me, which is going to make it harder for me to take the time out to come back on to record. It's going to be much easier for me to spend time writing and thinking and putting that out via our newsletter. And I'll share more about why things are going to get busy in the next week or two, but it's all good stuff. And I'm super excited to let you all know. So, with that, if you have not joined the newsletter, and I know some of you already have, thank you for that, please join. And once you do join, you'll only get messages after every episode, nothing else. But I invite you to share your thoughts with me or reflections, or even just like let me know if that was a good or a bad episode. I just want to hear from you all. I want to be in better connection with my community. So, with that, go to firstfunderspod.com and drop your name in the newsletter. I might have to manually add you because I know some of you listeners out there already, but please do that. And would love to hear what you think. Thank you again. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this community. And we'll see ya next time. Ciao.